Alright, so it's no secret that throughout the years, color has become an increasingly important tool for filmmakers to tell the story. As humans, color is all around us and it affects every part of our lives. There's been multiple studies that have shown that not only does color elicit an emotion, but it can also trigger things like environmental cues around us. Red can signify things like power, lust, passion. Green can produce unnatural or sickly vibes, or warn us that there's something a little bit off about our environment and give us an uneasy feeling. Now, as a filmmaker, if you're deciding how to tell your story and directing, for example, or if you're on the back end choosing how to best tell the story through color and color grading, then this is going to be an important topic to you. We're talking about color theory today. This is one of the most interesting topics to me and something that I can talk about all day, especially if you're looking at things like comparing reference images and looking at films and how they use color throughout their work. Right before we get started on this video though, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button down below and also enable notifications so that you don't miss any new videos that I put out. Weekly videos go up talking all about filmmaking, color grading, editing, and so much more. So make sure that you guys hit that bell as well as the subscribe button so that you don't miss another video. All right, so before the days of chemical treatments for film and now digital sensors, a lot of storytelling was just shot in black and white, and a lot of the nuance that was done was mainly done through lighting and lighting contrast that you would then come out in different shades of white or black. Now, fast forward just a little bit and filmmakers started being able to literally paint on color to their film strips. They could use this to emphasize different parts of their film, and this literally became the beginning of color in film that we know today. Now, eventually we went on to things like Technicolor, and colors in film started to become a lot more vibrant and common, and one of the ways to tell story now evolved to where art direction was really important and could really inform the look of your film. We've continued to evolve, and now it's more important than ever to realize how our choices, especially through color and direction and art, can influence the mood and look of a film. Now, one of the most interesting aspects for me of color theory is not only just picking the different hues of colors, but also seeing how those choices then interact with each other. Now, if we look at a color wheel, we can see that we have all the typical aspects that we usually see on a vector scope. So you have your warm colors on one side and your cool colors on the other side, just like a vector scope. But that's just one aspect of color known as hue. There's also saturation, so colors can be very vivid and saturated, or they can be desaturated, and that will feel a lot different depending on what you're going for. Lastly, there's also value or luminance, which is how bright a color is. The lower the value, the closer we get to black, and the higher the value, the closer we get to white. Now, there are so many good examples of how filmmakers use colors to inform and affect the mood of their films, but something to keep in mind are color schemes. Now let's take a look at some of the most common examples, and I'm also going to put them into Resolve as well so we can look at the vector scopes and the color grading and kind of see what that looks like practically in Resolve. All right, now this is not one that's typically seen very often, but monochromatic can have a great impact on your film. Now, obviously the variety that you get is by playing around with the different values of the same color, since we're talking about a color that lives in the same space, right? Monochromatic implying one color. Now, Wes Anderson is a good example of this. He uses the monochromatic look in a number of his films, and he does it to great success. You can see he's adding the contrast and the interest back in through playing around with the different values of the same color. The Matrix also uses this look exclusively when they're all plugged in, so green permeates all aspects of that world, giving us a very unnatural feeling. Something is amiss here. We can see there are different values here creating depth and separation, but the image largely lives in one hue. In this case, we have green. Now, very similar to the monochromatic look, we have the analogous colors. Now, basically, these are colors or hues that live next to each other in the same space on a color wheel. So for example, we can have yellow and green, or we can have different hues of blue, for example, or red, yellow, and orange. All of those are right next to each other on the color wheel. Now, these colors are very often picked with a specific purpose. So for example, you can have one part of the story take place in one analogous analogous color scheme, and then another part of the story that's meant to contrast or create that interest take place in an opposite part of an analogous color scheme. So for example, you can have like red, orange, and yellow, for example, in one part, and then have all blues in another part of your film. Hopefully, also through story, you achieve that contrast as well, where you can tell a story, for example, of two worlds colliding, and you can show them off through the different color schemes. Now, complementary is probably one of the most used and the most common ones that you're going to find anywhere in film. Now, and before you write it off, although I will admit that it has been done very badly at times, there's actually a reason why it's the most common one, and there is a reason why it's so popular. Now, the reason's actually in the name. They're complementary colors. Reason being is that they look very good together. They're two colors that complement each other very well. Now, this is that cool teal in the background where it might be darker and you have those blue hues coming through, and in the foreground you get more of the orangish and yellow hues, which complement skin tones very well. And that leads me to my next point. Another reason why the complementary color scheme looks so good, it's a naturally occurring color scheme that we can see all around us. For example, if you look at our skin tone on the skin tone line in vector scopes in Davinci Resolve, you can see we actually fall towards the yellowish orange spectrum of the color wheel. If you look at what's directly opposite that on the vector scope, you get your blues and teals. So naturally creating a complementary look with skin tones on one side and then what could be your background on the other side. Now, there are so many examples of this, so we won't go through them all, but I'm going to put a few on screen for you here where you can look. These are examples that I think were done pretty well and tastefully as well. There are some more drawn out extremes, obviously, where it's overdone or really oversaturated. I don't personally like those looks, although I can understand why they would be used sometimes, but the ones that I've picked and the ones that I'm going to show, I think are done really tastefully, and I think that there's a real nuance to how they're done and implemented in these films. Now, pay real attention though to how some of these looks are very pulled, especially on the vector scopes. Now, not all of them have to be exaggerated. If we look, there's obviously some examples where the colors are actually pretty muted, although you can still see the contrast. Now, closely related to that is split complementary or triadic color schemes. Basically what that does is it takes split complementary but splits off one of the colors to kind of create a Y look on your vector scope or your color wheel. So essentially what you're doing is you have three colors now that are evenly spaced apart on the color wheel. Now, this can be used in a variety of ways. That doesn't mean that you have to have an equal representation of all of these colors in your shot. It could just mean, for example, that you're trying to draw attention to something. An object that you want everybody to look at in the frame, for example, could be red, and then the other colors in the scene are just split complementary on the other side. This color scheme can also be used to create really interesting color palettes. For example, maybe a lot of like night scenes or nightlife or something. You can use split complementary or triadic colors to create an interesting looking nightlife as well. All right, so now that you know the rules and we've kind of went through some of the examples and you've seen how they're used practically in film, if you know how to use them, that means that you can plan for it and you can use it in your looks and break it a little bit when it makes sense. Plan it out, make sure that you know and understand your characters, the story, and how color can play in to everything that you're doing with your film. And once you know that, you can use color to create a very interesting look for you and your film. If you're on the back end color grading as well, you can make very specific choices on what to bring out, what to separate in terms of the colors to make your film more interesting or make your color grade more interesting as well when you start developing your own looks. And keep in mind, just because something's been done before doesn't mean that you can't make it your own. So a lot of times, for example, a scene or a shot will lend itself to split complementary where you have like the orange and teal look, for example, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that your orange and teal has to look like every other time it's been done in a film. There are a lot of ways to make it nuanced. There are a lot of ways to make it your own. The important part is that you know what the rule is, how it's supposed to look, why it's supposed to look that way, how that helps the story, and then you can implement your own flavor into it as well. For example, now you can start having different colors represent different specific persons in a story, or you can have color call back to something that you want the audience to remember, or it can start representing things like moods. Or for example, you can also have it in a story where the color shifts over time as the character arc also develops over a film as well. Now, all of these are artistic choices, and these are things that you have license to do even in post-production when you're color grading the film and finishing it, but it's important to know how your choices affect the audience. The reason I say that is because color is a very powerful tool, but as powerful as it is, it can also really muddy up your image and cloud the message that you're trying to get through to the audience. It's really easy to start tuning out of a film if everything is really busy in the frame and fighting for your attention. That's a good way to get the audience lost and for them not to really know what to look at. All right, so bonus tip actually, here is a favorite tool of mine when you're in Davinci Resolve. Not only do we have great tools like our vector scopes and so on to help us, but let's say I want to really analyze a reference frame or my current image that I'm actually working on. I can actually open effects and scroll down to the Resolve FX Generate panel and drop the color palette onto my node, and Resolve will actually break down the various colors in my shot or my reference image. So you have some controls on the sides like increasing or decreasing the amount of colors it's showing or focusing in on different highlights or shadows, but it's a super useful tool to really start analyzing your images so that you can break them down and you can see, for example, if you're pulling in a reference frame from another movie, how they use color in their shots so that you can replicate it for yourself as well. All right, so that's it for this video. If you guys really enjoyed this one and if you stuck all the way through, thank you so much for watching. You guys are awesome. Make sure that you're subscribed, hit the like button down below, leave a comment, take this video, share it with your friends, share it with people you may know, tell them to subscribe, you know, do all the YouTube things. Until next time though, go out there and create something. La da vedere.